The internet is a fascinating place, don't you think? Fandoms come forth and prosper on this massive worldwide network. Content is produced by the minute, and people interact with one another from beyond just being there in person. The internet is a fascinating place, and it's why people like myself and many others are magnetized to the things of the internet, and time itself forgot. Due to my nature to tend to end up in these rabbit holes of obscure things, it led me down into some particular and interesting rabbit holes that resulted in some of the episodes of CRT Dreams that you see on my channel, specifically the Doomsday Clock episode and the Chu Teng one. Thanks to the success of the latter, I had ended up woven into the Osamu Sato fandom, a group of people who adore the works of the man known as Osamu Sato, and as such, the aforementioned Chu Teng, and the infamous LSD Dream Emulator. But unbeknownst to me, in November of 2019, one post on their Discord server would not only lead many of us down a rabbit hole we never knew about, but would cause a butterfly effect and result in something far bigger and far greater than any of us could have imagined. That post is this little guy. Look at him, he's dancing, he's so cute. Everyone, say hello to Sapari Cat. On November 25th, 2019, a user named Catface posted a gif of the Sapari Cat in the music and art channel on the Osamu Sato Discord server. The interest was immediate, with people taking to asking about the cat and being in awe at how cute he was. When asked on where the cat was from, a user in the server replied, Sapari Community Place. And from there, the interest was set in stone. People were clearly interested. At the time, I had been pretty busy with other projects, and I had also been working on the beginning of the second season of CRT Dreams, so I really couldn't dive deep into it, so it remained on the back burner for a while. However, around February of 2020, my interest in Sapari within was revived, and me and many others began to dig into Sapari Community Place around February time. This led me and others down a rabbit hole that led us to discovering what Sapari Community Place is, and what happened to it. Catface had originally posted the Sapari Cat gif because he thought it was cute. Unbeknownst to him, it would lead to a butterfly effect that would not only shed light on some of the most obscure content on the internet, but a game that time forgot and the odd history it brought along with it, leading us down a strange and bizarre rabbit hole, dating all the way back to 1997. Sit back and relax as we take a deep dive into the forgotten world of Sapari Community Place and figure out what it is exactly, what happened to it, and who made it. Let's go! Sapari is an oddity. What do I mean? So, you see, it's kind of rare for me to come across something as obscure as Sapari this easily. In all the topics I have spoken about in CRT Dreams, from the forgotten PS2 generation to a channel that archived an anime, etc, 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 this is probably the most obscure thing I've ever stumbled upon, and I'm glad. I love this stuff. I love this sort of stuff, and even without CRT Dreams, I pretty much stumble into and look at wormholes, rabbit holes, these obscure and odd things within media of all kinds. Some of which I have yet to talk about. But regardless, Sapari was and is a unicorn, and I wouldn't have really come across it naturally. Let's get right into the details. Let's talk about Sapari itself. So, what exactly is Sapari Community Place? I asked this question during the early days of Sapari's emergence onto the Osamu Sato Discord server, and the response was quite interesting. It was an MMO that began in 1997, lasting for 6 whole years until its eventual discontinuation in 2003. Immediately, as soon as I looked at Sapari Cat himself, my immediate thought was that this was from the same era of the PlayStation 1. Look at the way the cat looks, then compare it to something like LSD Dream Emulator or Metal Gear Solid or anything that's PS1 centric. I was somewhat right. See, Sapari Community Place was strongly connected to Sony, seemingly as an MMO that they were handling or had some part in. At the time, there was virtually no information surrounding the mysterious MMO, I was actually given a search engine for older websites called Wibby to look for traces of Sapari on, and even then, there was nothing. Sapari was a ghost on the internet, but soon enough we would find more information on what it exactly was. There were results, just we didn't know back then. The history that was once accessible and known to a fair degree was splintered, and the fragments were hidden in all sorts of corners of the infinite sea of the internet. For this part, I'll be doing this a bit differently. Compared to my usual topics, this one has history both old and new to it. In order to understand Sapari, the present day and the past have to be explained in order to grasp the scope of the entire thing. Past and present collide, and Sapari is the crux of it all. Let's talk about the present day first. So how did all of this begin in the first place? So, as I mentioned before, Sapari was first truly found by me and other people when we found the GIF of the Sapari cat that had been posted by Catface. From there, it had ignited interest, and over time the Osamu Sato server took a liking to Sapari cat, becoming a wholesome meme or mascot of sorts. This was around November 2019 to February 2020. The interest would keep growing from there as I could contribute to the research, discovering screenshots, video footage, fan sites, forum sites, and the official media of the MMO. Some notable discoveries included an entire blog of an old Sapari Community Place member, animations of other animals than just the Sapari cat, and tons more. The interest in Sapari that had occurred in February would continue in March as well, and by this point the interest in it had been so prominent in the off-topic channel of the server that two major things would happen. A dedicated channel for Sapari was created and placed in the lower end of the server, acting as a hub for all the talk that had been going on about the mysterious and forgotten MMO, and a server of its own was made. I joined up in both areas, and I eventually became a moderator of the Sapari Discord. From there, all the way into April 2020, we kept researching and the love for Sapari kept growing. I cannot express how nice it is to really not only see something as old as Sapari Community Place being, well, essentially given a second chance at life. It had its day in the sun, but how often do you find old properties like this having a second and even brighter wave of popularity? The art, the memes, even the little dancing gif being modified into strange and wonderful little things is honestly one of the coolest things I've seen in my lifetime on the internet. There really has been so much achieved from November 2019 to April 2020. I have to express my thanks to the Sapari channel, the server, the users, Vmon, Catface, Chia, Cam Woodstock, G, Pumpkin, and tons more people for helping out with the search. Everyone really has been playing their part. It's not just an effort from me, it's a group effort. So, with the current history out of the way, how did Sapari Community Place come to actually be? Here is what I was able to find out after my research. Keep in mind that a lot of pieces are still missing, and due to the age of it, a lot is probably lost. Keep this in mind. The origins of Sapari are quite strange really, as while you would expect it to begin when Sapari itself began, so 1997, you can trace things far further back than that, to 1986. In 1986, the man who would come to be the creator of Sapari Community Place, Tsunetake Noma, would attend Sophia University in Japan and would graduate from there in 1993. Sophia University was notable for being one of the oldest Catholic universities in the whole of Japan, and emphasized its approach on opening windows widely to today's rapidly changing world and sharing the hopes and tribulations of humanity. We wish to devote ourselves to the welfare and creative advancement of the world. End quote. Early information on Noma himself seems to be really scarce, but judging from what fields he graduated in, electronics, computer and information, and the fact that the university he attended had the approach of emphasizing creativity, it can be presumed that he decided to pursue an apparent interest in electronics and computers. Graduating in 1993, it's unknown what Noma did from here, although according to known history on his LinkedIn history, he would get a job at Sony within the same year, although it doesn't particularly elaborate on what he did, describing his role only as an engineer. Meanwhile, the landscape of graphics and technology would continue to keep improving. You see, back in the early 90s, the technology was booming. Consoles were becoming far more advanced, and emphasis on three-dimensional graphics and polygons had begun to form, and media such as CDs were beginning to make other technologies seem somewhat redundant in their use, but the largest contribution was the World Wide Web, otherwise known as the Internet. The Internet would open up a new avenue for many things, but things would truly begin to advance with the very first international conference on the World Wide Web in 1994. This was a pivotal moment in the history of the Internet, and one effect of it was the ideas that came from a particular individual, known as Dave Raggett. Around that time, a certain format for files called VRML had begun to crop up. However, it was not named at the time. Dave Raggett proposed that the file format that had arisen during the November of 1994 be named VRML. What exactly is VRML though? VRML was a file format for direct usage in the World Wide Web for the purpose of 3D graphics. In other words, it was a file format that allowed for 3D spaces to be created directly on the internet. The format initially didn't seem to have much of a name, but Dave Raggett would coin the name of the format during that very first international conference on the World Wide Web. VRML was a new and widely wanted format, and it would begin to find some usage from many different companies. There was a growing interest in it, and many companies wanted to use it. And one such company would be Sony. Details in 1994 are murky, but things would begin to change from around March of 1995, as Sony would begin to have their own hand in usage of the format. In 1995, a major event would be announced that would shake up the landscape of net-based projects. This project was the Internet 1996 World Exposition, a massive fair/expo, both online and offline, to show off net projects that will push the power of the internet to its fullest, taking full use of the possibilities it had. Beginning on the 8th of February 1996, the fair was a massive success, with the practical uses of the net being shown to their full glory, 100 countries participating in it. Details are somewhat hazy, but the ability of the expo to show off cool little projects and massive undertakings, including showing off political debates in streams, proved that the net was full of potential. A cool little project that had a presence at the expo was Dream Nexus, which was about sharing dreams with the usage of CGI, and sharing them with friends in one of the first ever examples of media sharing. With information of projects like Dream Nexus existing, this accurately implies that this was an expo for projects like these, alongside the more practical and informative uses of the World Wide Net. And this was a rightful assumption. Sony was not going to let such an opportunity go by, and Sony was one of the main participants of the Japanese side of the expo. As a result, with the expo going on and Sony being one of the major sponsors, organisers and contributors, according to this page, the still new edition of Suna Takenoma would be assigned to creating a project that would be featured in the expo. The result was Circus Park, a prototypical romp through a modelled world of a circus park. While being somewhat basic, it was impressive for what it was at the time, and it featured as such in the expo. While it's unknown exactly when Circus Park was released within the year, a basic presumption can be made. Due to the freshness of the tech that was most likely used to create it, and due to the end of the expo being in December, it can be presumed that it was made around anywhere between spring to autumn of 1996. During this year, the Sony Computer Science Laboratories would create a group of servers that would host a product known as CyberPassage. Developed by two individuals, Junichi Korimoto and Jun Reikimoto, it was Sony's foray into the usage of VRML in their own technology, aside from Circus Park, and CyberPassage would be a host to two things: the server itself, named the CyberPassage Bureau, and the CyberPassage Browser. The CyberPassage would be a host of Circus Park and other such projects that Sony would begin to plan. Elsewhere within the year of 1996, an interesting little experiment with the capabilities of the VRML format would soon come from a company known as GCO, Graphics and Communications, which had arisen within this same year. The The result was Honjo Jidaimura, a playable MMO of sorts that was a recreation of an old Japanese city that was once present 200 years ago. It was a fascinating experiment of just how powerful the format could be, recreating a city from the far distant past. Not much information seems to exist around Mora, but it can be presumed it was widely praised for its then fascinating usage of a format that had been primarily focused on browsing up until that point. It's worth mentioning that with the heavy emphasis of the 100 countries having joined up for the Expo in 1996, and the emphasis on the real world and information in it, it can be presumed that it was a massively successful venture for GCO. With Sony having put their hat into the VRML ring with Circus Park and other projects like Honjo Jidaimura having shown the power and potential of the VRML format, Sony was fascinated. As a result, they focused the Sony Architecture Research Center on content development. They wanted their hat in the ring of VRML creations even more so than they already had done, and as a result, a new project would be born, and they assigned Tsunetake Noma as the main man in charge of it. Thus, a new project by Noma had begun development. It's unknown exactly when the project began, but with Sony's prominent role in the Expo, them being responsible for the distribution of Circus Park as well, it can be presumed that development of Noma's new project began in the late summer to autumn of 1996. This new project would have only Noma as the main man in the team. Noma as the leader of the project and the only person in it. To quote Noma directly from a translated excerpt, quote, "Even though it was a unit, I was the only one actually working. I was the one in charge of planning, direction, and programming, authoring, end quote. Noma was in charge of everything to do with this new project, and there was a lot to do. But judging from the rare pieces of information that seem to exist on this project, Noma seemingly didn't have a problem with this. In fact, Noma was pretty much a one-man army. A slight exception to this would be Noma hiring out a subcontractor to work on the models, the modeling data, to which Noma would test out via a complex process of converting the data into a suitable format. It's unknown if the designs of this project were made by Noma or an outside party, but it can be presumed that it was the outsourced party, the subcontractor, that had a hand in the design of things. It's interesting to note that the subcontractor was most likely GCO, according to this page, the creators of Honjo Jidaimura. The online aspect of this project would be rigorously tested every day. Noma would test his idea out with 2 computers, refining the process each time. With Noma constantly testing the project out, and with the additional help of GCO, the project would begin taking shape. Noma's prototypical design of the older Circus Park project shown off in the Expo would not be very prominent or evident with this new project, as the help from GCO would ensure the project looked and felt a lot more refined. The extent of Noma's control over the project is ultimately debatable due to Sony essentially being in charge of Noma's actions ultimately due to him being an employee at the company. But judging from what scraps of information do exist, Noma had enough creative control to be the person who would be in charge of production, planning and direction. Keep this in mind for later. An interesting detail about Noma's project's development was that it was seemingly not intended for the Expo in 1996. This can be inferred by the lack of references to the project anywhere in the Expo, and the fact that the Expo ended during the project's development. The process of the project being named, let alone being developed as a whole, is shrouded in mystery for the most part, with the rare details managing to be known. And due to the lack of development documents out there, there's no way to know how the actual project was turning out. However, during the research process for this very exact video, a user by the name of HXDCE was able to data mine the project, being able to discover a piece of information within that shed some light on its development history. Digging through the code, HXDCE and members of the Discord were surprised to find that some avatars, aka the Sapari cat and the other animals, were referred to in the code with the name of Forest Park avatars, the copyright being listed as copyright 1996 Sony Corporation, all rights reserved. From this, it can be presumed that the copyright of the project was sorted out within this year, but the name listed is what's intriguing here. Forest Park avatars. From this, it can be found that the project was originally going to be named Forest Park. What's even more intriguing is that the date that is also listed within the code is 96/12/26, 1996, December 26. This implies that the copyright for the project was done by this time, and the project was originally meant to be called Forest Park. However, this name would not stick as the project would eventually become known as Sampo Park Relaxation, abbreviated to Sapari, and with the additional moniker of Community Place, with the time between December 26 and the eventual release date being that of less than 2 months. If the name was decided to be Forest Park from this point, but the name was ultimately changed, it could imply that there was a level of crunch that Noma had to do alongside Sony, sorting out the name changing process and changing the copyright. The details on the name change from Forest Park to Sapari are unknown overall. During the development of the Sapari project, Cyber Passage became known internally as Community Browser, presumably changed to fit the Sapari project. It's not known when exactly the theme of the project, or its name for that matter, was decided, but it can be presumed that this decision was done to put the older projects and the new Sapari project under one consistent wing. According to Noma, however, it was due to legal issues involving the trademark of the name Cyber Passage. Nonetheless, with all this in mind, Sapari Community Place would launch on February 6, 1997, and the website would launch on the same day. While exact numbers are hard to verify due to the era and a multitude of other reasons, the MMO was successful. According to Noma himself, in an old article, he mentions that Sapari had acquired hundreds of thousands of users. Noma was clever in that he knew that the growing nature of the internet would not be sustainable for Sapari in the long run, so having it pre-installed on certain computers helped to grow the MMO and the user base. Noma's description of users, however, might be downplaying the impact of Sapari for the sake of simplicity in the article. Regardless, Sapari was a massive success, and with it pre-installed on VAIO computers, it was an effective strategy at getting people on board to play it. Sapari would start out relatively basic, having only the park world at launch according to Sapari's fan site, Sapper Cafe. Player reactions of the basicness of Sapari seem to be somewhat lost to time, although with the active state of the site and the MMO's model for updating as time goes on, it can be presumed that players were happy to play regardless. No screenshots or videos seem to exist of the 1997 version of Sapari, however. One of the most alluring aspects of Sapari was how it was free. It didn't have any costs for sign-up or becoming part of the MMO's player base, an aspect that makes Sapari stand out compared to even the modern MMOs. Combined with the continuous updating over time, cute art style, and being pre-installed onto VAIO systems, Sapari would grow at an exponential rate. In May of this year, Sapari would have an additional outlet for people to come across it in the form of several promotions via magazines. With physical discs having the game on, in tandem with the site having links to the game, the outreach of Sapari was beginning to expand significantly. While the months between Sapari's birth in February 1997 and November 1997 are unclear for the most part, and with the lack of captures from the Wayback Machine, it can be presumed that the site was being built as it went along. The site would act as a major hub for updates and new content, according to the Sapper Cafe. Sapari would get some major updates, however, at the end of 1997, as on November 16th, a new location within the game, the quote-unquote Spring World, end quote, was revealed on an interview done by the NHK. It's unknown who was being interviewed, although it's likely it was either Tsunetaka Noma or a Sony representative. Unfortunately, this interview seems to be lost to time. I couldn't find a transcript or a copy of it anywhere. Later on in December of that year, on the 5th of that month, a new world for the game, named Coast, would also be announced, to be shown off at an event called Digital Content Plaza 2. Sapari had a significant presence in the real world, and Sapari was still receiving major updates. Reactions from the player base are unknown, although considering that these were major updates back in the day, it can be inferred that spirits were extremely high within the player base. From digging into its history, it seems there was no Christmas or New Year related updates, but regardless, with 2 major updates out and the player base seemingly enjoying the game, Sapari would continue into the next year in high spirits. One final boost to Sapari within this year would come in the form of an additional boost to the awareness of Sapari on the net. Sapari was now a bundled and recommended piece of software if net users got interested and wanted to own the latest version of Netscape Communicator. Netscape back in this day and age was a prominent name, and as such this would have given a significant boost to Sapari as a result. As 1997 ended, Sapari would continue into the next year. Sapari's first anniversary was beginning to come round, with 1997 having been a tremendous year for Sapari. What would 1998 bring? 1998 would be an even more active year for Sapari. It's not known when it was announced, but with the anniversary of Sapari coming up, February 6th, would be celebrated in the form of a competition for a catchphrase/slogan that would describe Sapari the best. Dozens of people would participate with specific prizes for the winners and runner-ups. Such prizes included postcards, a telephone card, and your slogan being at the front page with your name there to credit you. It can be implied from here that due to how active this competition was, the Sapari development team and the player base were particularly close. Sapari would receive another update around the end of February in the form of a version exclusive to the Sony Vaio PCG505 computer. While there are no major differences between this version of Sapari and the one in the various magazines, Sapari had another outlet for reaching out and obtaining new players. Sapari would receive its next major update on March 6th of that year, adding one of the worlds from the older Honjo Jidaimura. The company who made that, GCO, and Sapari's team teaming up to add the world in. Later in July, on the 6th of that month, the Sapari community would expand beyond the game itself in the form of Club Sapporo/Club Sapari, a fully dedicated forum for the game and its players. Unfortunately, these forums seem inaccessible now, but it can be presumed that this was one of the many places outside of the game that the players could interact on. As time went onward, things with Sapari would get a little quieter, but would ultimately move on at a smooth pace. As 1998 transitioned into 1999, January 1999 would see a big update in the form of the game's servers expanding in size due to an apparent influx of users and the size of the user base having become massive. June 28th would bring an expansion to one of the existing worlds, but the most important update would come in the announcement of Sapari Millennium. Sapari Millennium was another version of the game that would be compatible with the upcoming newer sets of operating systems and hardware, and would allow Sapari to continue existing even on the most modern of computers at the time. Sapari Millennium would begin a beta test on November 1st of that year. All in all, things were looking extremely promising for Sapari, and the popularity of it remained consistent. But all good things end up crumbling down into dust eventually. Unbeknownst to Sapari, the player base and even Noma, one looming phantom of a problem would begin to make its appearance and would begin to cause problems for an otherwise peaceful and popular game. That problem? Sony themselves. A quirk of Sapari has always been the fact that, well, it never made a profit. No joke, Sapari had never been a monetized project. Money was poured into it, and money was poured into maintaining the servers, but it never made a penny from the day it began. As a result, It was not mentioned at all in the financial reports of Sony from 1997 to 2000. There is no mention of Sapari anywhere. And this made it an oddball amongst the project lineup Sony had. Keep in mind that Sony, first and foremost, is out to make a profit, so Sapari stuck out like a really sore thumb. This wasn't like the Expo where the Circus Park project was free because it was for the sake of the Expo and not trying to make money off of it. Sapari was a project that blossomed from one of its most talented employees and quickly rose to prominence as one of the most successful ventures Sony had, at the cost of never making a penny. This factor would lead to one of the worst decisions that had ever been made for Sapari. 2000 had come and gone, and Sapari continued blissfully, with minimal updates here and there, like maintenance and the fact that Sapari Millennium had launched to a good degree of success in January of that year. Despite this, things would take a massive turn for the worse in 2001 when a multitude of changes occurred. Firstly, the site had gotten a long-needed revamp, which actually had improved the site and made it more user-friendly. But this good change was eclipsed by the monumental change in how the game would run. It's unknown exactly when the change occurred, but sometime around summer or June of 2001, Sapari was changing its free-to-play model into that of a pay-to-play one. This was a surprise to the user base, as Sapari had been running freely for no cost or extra charge since its birth. This change had apparently been received negatively, extremely so by the fanbase/user base, as the official Sapari page had to clarify details in an entirely separate FAQ. It can be presumed that the Club Sapporo members had been extremely outspoken about the change, and it forced the hands running the game to clarify before damage got extremely bad. The change took effect on the 3rd of July 2001, with the initial price being that of 2,000 or 1,500 yen for 200 days of access. While some were probably unhappy with the price to pay for accessing the game, others were undoubtedly confused at the pricing of something that should have been free anyway. The core game had never changed to warrant the pricing, which probably led to a lot of repulsion of the choice. The fee would change once again on September 1st of that year, with the price being 300 yen per month, or roughly £2 per month, which was an odd change from the initial price. The change was baffling and oddly sudden considering the game usually provided updates on the game like additional content. So what happened here? What happened here to change things? According to Noma, since Sony has never seemingly commented on why they changed things, Noma's control over the project was taken away from him for reasons unknown. As a result, Sony was now in charge of the project, and had access to the game and the webpage, and as a result, Club Sapporo, that kept the community tight-knit and together. Noma posits that the operating cost of the server and the lack of a reliable business model in the eyes of Sony was the reason why his control over the once-free MMO, the once-free game, ended, and morphed into something that Sony could now begin to make a profit off of, albeit one they had to certainly backtrack due to the outrage. This disgust and repulsion within the decision was a choice that unintentionally caused a butterfly effect, as according to the Wikipedia page for Sapari and Noma himself, the community had ended up collapsing due to the forced change. While the community was still somewhat active and people did keep playing during the entire ordeal, resentment had sprung up from the choice and had shot Sapari in the foot, and it was on a downward spiral. It's worth noting, by the way, that Noma, without the confirmation that players knew if he was the creator or not, because that detail is quite vague, it's unknown if they actually knew he was the creator or not. Well, Noma was in fact one of the players of the game, if this page is to be correct. So it's highly possible that while he was kicked off the development of his own game, he was actively seeing his creation be tampered and messed with by the very company he worked for. 2002 would come to be, and Sapari was in a dreadful shape. while a newer version of Sapari had been announced that would be able to be played directly on a website, Sapari Millennium Alpha, this was seemingly not enough to quell the unease with the community. Even stranger was the fact that due to the sharp decline in the user base, maps that were once separate on Sapari would be merged together by Sony in a weird, desperate move which has yet to be explained. The damage had been done. Without warning, on November 15th, a notice on the Sapari site had announced the shutdown of the service, saying, quote, "Sapari's service has ended," end quote, with the end date being announced as January 2003. On December 3rd, the alpha version of Sapari Millennium would be cancelled and shut down as well. A description of the atmosphere at the final days of Sapari's life can be found in the blog of a former user, as seen here. While I'll come back to what he says in full later, here are two quotes that present the atmosphere of Sapari Community Place at the time. On the final day of Sapari's life, in a world where only 20 people would now usually be in that climate, 200 users gathered to visit the world of Sapari one last time. At long last, the moment came, and Sapari was shut down forever at 3 PM in the afternoon on January 31st, 2003. Sapari Community Place closed on January 31st, 2003, having lasted for nearly 6 years. Sapari was gone.
Mine is like 13/2. It's like...
With Sapari Community Place dead, what happened from here? What happened from January 31st, 2003? With the death of the game, fans were certainly not happy. Due to the lack of Club Sapporo existing anymore, it's hard to find the exact reactions of players, but there were things still going on after this point. With a bit of digging, I was able to find an old forum elsewhere of players reminiscing about the times they had on the game, including some descriptions of the exact things that were done, being an unintentionally depressing retrospective on the times that, well, were lost. From further investigation, this page shows that there has been a significant sect of the old Sapari community that still wanted to stick together. Its most recent activity has actually been of May from this year, May of 2020, with the earliest activity having been June 5th, 2004. Players would congregate in their own spaces as well, such examples being these two, Zako and Riru, reminiscing about their times, both documenting their experiences with the app. I did attempt to contact former other players, but I didn't get much in terms of responses. I was actually able to get in contact with Zako with the help of a user on the Sato cord named Chia, who was able to translate my questions into Japanese, and thus I was able to have a conversation about Sapari with Zako. Initially, I sent an email to introduce myself and what I was asking Zako in particular about. Not long after, to my surprise, since I had thought that Zako's blog was inactive, I received a response. With promising results, I was able to begin compiling a list of questions with Chia that would hopefully be able to provide the search that was going on at the time with some more information. The back and forth continued between me and Zako for some time, and I eventually sent over the questions that he would be willing to respond to, as seen here. Sometime later, I received a response, to which I was extremely thankful for. From Zako's information, some very intriguing details can be found. For example, Zako himself believing that the lack of profit didn't kill Sapari, but the lack of people and lonely feeling to the game being the cause. Also of note is his belief that it was more a community than an actual game, and as a result, nothing could replace it truly. Other notable information includes the lack of seasonal events, according to Zako, and offline parties that were held between users. This information can be corroborated with the many sites that exist out there to document such meetups, which remain some of the few fragments of Sapari that have survived the time over the net, such as this one. Elsewhere, another site, Sapper Cafe, had been up and active, having seemingly documented the fall of Sapari However, Sapari Cafe had been making an active attempt to bring Sapari back in the form of a petition. From the end of Sapari all the way up to 2009, there had been a petition in place that got signatures over time to try and convince Sony to bring the MMO back, but it never accumulated enough signatures to get the attention of Sony or to get them to reconsider. Sapari clearly was something people were not going to forget. What happened to Sapari's creator though, Tsunetaka Noma? It's hard to exactly track how his life went from here, but Noma stayed on board Sony until December of 2004. Reasons unknown as to why he left. As much as I've tried to look, no reason has ever been specified for him leaving the company. It is worth noting, however, that his creation was in fact patented with a few different things, so it could be possible that the patenting of his work, which he might or might not have been involved with, although listed name-wise, plus Sapari's death, ultimately disillusioned him from being a part of the very company he worked so hard for. Over the course of the years, Noma would jump from different businesses to businesses, having a hefty amount of involvement in different ventures, a lot of which he still manages to this day and is a part of. His most recent venture would be being the CEO of a company known as Everblue Technologies. Despite everything, Noma remains a prominent and successful man in the industries of Japan. Noma hasn't forgot about Sapari though, and in a 2017 post onto his personal blog, he spoke of the ups and downs of the project, including the utilization of the project's potential for a spin-off of sorts called Sapari Girl, and having to expand to a team to cover the large popularity of the game, while Noma also expresses his longing for the rush and chaoticness of that time, indicating a desire to go back. I actually did attempt to contact Noma through his Twitter account, as seen here, but no response has been given so far. A user named Veman on the Sapari Discord helped translate my query into Japanese, but as of now, no response has been given. It's not really known if Noma knows how loved his creation is. The Japanese love Sapari, and now the Western side is beginning to love it as well. I only hope, Noma, that you know how much people love your creation. With all of this in mind, here we are now, in the present day, still trying to figure out the pieces of the past. So, we spoke of the game and its history and where things have led up to now, but how about the game itself? Let's take a quick dive into that. Playing Sapari ultimately depends on two things, whether you're connected to a server or not, and if your computer can run it. Offline play works fine with the game, albeit you cannot use functions like chatting, and exploring the strange little worlds the game has to offer is quite charming, regardless of if you can connect or not. If you are connected, which I will get to in this video soon, then the functions inaccessible offline are now accessible to you in the online state. Installation can be quite strange due to the Japanese text during the process not being recognised, but it works well and can be ran from any computer ranging from Windows 98 to Windows 10. Playing Sapari is a very interesting experience, as while the game itself has aged in quite a few ways, it remains a lively game nonetheless, with lobbies of players on it becoming pretty fun when people mess around with the game and say hi to one another. It's a very community-driven game. I mean, that's why it's called Sapari Community Place. There is certainly a reason for why this game was loved by many, and why we've managed to truly bring it back. From July to December of this year, 2020, we managed to bring Sapari back to how it originally was. But we haven't been the first to try. In general, there has been a more explorative side of the old Sapari fanbase, the Japanese players from long ago, exploring the little tricks of the trade, the little things to make playing the game even more interesting. You can see this on Sapari Cafe, for example, as seen here. However, this extended further to even after the death of Sapari. Not even death can prevent people from modifying the old game. Back in the old days, there was a particular user named Hoto, who did their own experiments on Sapari back in the day, apparently going as far as to create a quote-unquote fake Sapari, possibly their own server, lack of information is evident. A lack of information exists on this, but from what is known, there was an active piece in development that was aiming to achieve some sort of goal, resolution, perhaps even getting the game back itself. Why am I mentioning this here though? Simply put, it shows that there was a significant sect of people who were willing to try and create, modify, experiment with Sapari, especially after the game's death. It's possible that fan servers before nowadays could have existed, but with how long it has been since that time, the information might be lost. It makes it all the more notable that Sapari fully came back then. Well, sort of, but allow me to explain. Around the end of July 2020, we had discovered something intriguing. A simple YouTube video of Sapari back in action. But how? Sapari had been dead all this time. The video had been uploaded to YouTube on July 12, 2020, a few weeks before HXDC had put it onto the Sapari Discord server. The video was by a guy named Bara. The reaction in the server was immediate, with myself freaking out over the find, and others relatively perplexed by it as well. I then did an at everyone in the server to get people's attention, to show them the video, and it caused the Sapari server to go into a frenzy, and the demand to try and get the creator of the video on the server was pretty high. We immediately got to work to finding someone who could speak Spanish, since Bara was, as far as we knew, a native Spanish speaker. HXDC located the server Bara was in, and we kept speculating on the Discord server. We spread the news of this discovery to the Sato Cord in an attempt to find someone who could speak Spanish, to talk to Bara, and find out how Bara had seemingly got Sapari working again in this day and age. The server had blown up, and discussions on the information that had been discovered so far were being retold to new members as they were joining, order links being pinned, new people coming into the server. In general, it was a spike in activity, and the community was coming together in unison to await good news about potentially getting Sapari fully back. If we had the method, we could do all sorts with it. It was then that we began to receive some news that HXDC had got in contact with Bara, both of them talking in English, and HXDC promising us that he would attempt to get Bara onto the server. Users on the Sapari Discord server began replicating the process that Bara had used in the video, proving to us that it was in fact possible to get Sapari working in the modern age. As a result, users in the server started clamoring for a setup guide to get the game working, users being able to play with each other like how the original game was meant to be. The server was alive and buzzing with excitement, and this would continue for the next few hours and, subsequently, the next few days. Around this time, a user named Gato had been experimenting with a server process called Zero Tier, and while it did work, it was hard to get set on without a good amount of technical knowledge. Nonetheless, this was the first true way to play Sapari again, other than Bara's setup. Bara and Gato had been the first few people in a long time to get Sapari working like this, with other users like Nosamu and other people trying to make their own servers, resulting in what would come to be known as an important day in Sapari history, and the beginning of a new age in the server. Things would continue from here, and the hunt for a dedicated server, unlike that of Zero Tier, which was mostly temporary, was on. Things would flare up once again when a user joined the Sapari Discord server, then named Cog, but now known as Magnus Besson. Initially, their interest in the game was intriguing, to say the least. It was nothing in particular that got me perplexed by their occasional questions initially, but when he mentioned that he had an empty server being used for nothing, most eyes turned to him. We had Sapari working, but the process was incredibly difficult. Not everyone could do it, and there were people that were waiting to find a simpler solution. From the 3rd of August to the 29th, he worked diligently on testing the game out with his empty server, using myself as a beta tester of sorts. I had volunteered to help out, and he would report his findings on how the game reacted to a new IP and server from now and then, from time to time. While his initial attempts were met with some failures, he would crack the code eventually. August 30th, 2020. I'll remember this day for the rest of my life. This was the day we got Sapari fully back online. No temporary server, no temporary solution. A 24-hour server 7 days a week, just like how it originally was. All thanks to one man being able to get Sapari, the application, to recognize and connect to a fan server. In conjunction with tools by HXDCE and Bara, with the knowledge that had been given to us beforehand by people like Gato and Nosamu, and the entire server, we had the game back. Sapari was back online. But this is not where our story ends. From August to now, Sapari's presence on the internet has been beginning to expand. Every now and then, Sapari appears on Twitter, on accounts, on art pieces, so on and so forth. And because of this, the Sapari Discord server has been growing exponentially. It's brought tons of new people to play the game. We had it back up and running, albeit not the complete game, but we would be graced by the introduction of another person, 31 Kitoon. We had not been the only ones all this time who had been digging into Sapari Community Place. Outside of the Sapari Discord, which had been thriving with texture modding, application development to improve the game, fan art, plus the game in its revived state, Kitoon had been digging into Sapari too, even finding the old server files for the game back from its original days, and creating their own server. We invited them to the Sapari Discord server, and with the addition of what is now a second fan server keeping this once dead game alive, Sapari has a bright future ahead. In terms of the latest community endeavour, we celebrated the game 1 year after Catface had found it 1 year ago. From one simple posting of a GIF by one person to all of this, I cannot express how happy I am to see things come so far. We couldn't be any happier. So, what now? Where do we go from here? Well, I can say this. Sapari has become a rabbit hole that's led off into different places. The further you go in, the more you find, and this video is not all of it. This video is, in my opinion, 20% of the entire rabbit hole. In recent diggings, we've found names linked to Sapari's development, to the community browser's development, another MMO that Sapari players migrated to once Sapari died, and even more VRML history, even more VRML creations. Not everything has been covered in this YouTube video. This is the tip of the iceberg. Will there be another video like this on Sapari and its associated ties? Possibly, but with the basic history of all of this laid bare, it's good to remind ourselves of how all this began, in my opinion. Sapari, as a whole, while we have it back, is not entirely complete. Versions of Sapari that were produced in its final years still remain missing. There's apparently a version of Sapari that can support over 1,000 players, and the current one that we have can only support 12 per server. There is a lot that is still missing, and it's up to us, ultimately, to keep digging and keep trying to find out more about this game. Find out more about how it was made. Archive it as much as we can. We live in an age where things on the internet do not last forever. YouTube videos, art, games. It takes a lot to have something on the internet that can survive for so long. The nature of the internet is to produce and ultimately It will go away someday, but we can archive it as much as we can. Let's go back to how all this began. One man, one GIF, and an explosion of adoration towards a tiny little pink cat. It's funny. One of Catface's nicknames is Forest, and Sapari once had the name of Forest Park. In a way, you can say that Sapari has returned back to zero, to the forest.